In this final part of the video tutorial about Java plugins, I will explain how to create a plugin that implements a process. Please make sure that you watch the first two parts of the tutorial before watching this one. In the second part of the tutorial, I have explained how to create a Java plugin implementing a custom function. I will now explain what you need to do to implement a custom process. As mentioned before, the difference between functions and processes is that processes do not return a value but perform some operation, change objects, send emails, and so on. So processes can never be used in conditions of a rule, only in actions. Let's create a process that will perform some calculations and save the result in the attribute of some object. Here I have a small application from previous tutorials that manages purchase orders. An order consists of line items. Each line item has a total, which is calculated as multiplication of quantity and price. An order also has a total, and there is a rule that calculates this total as the sum of totals of line items that belong to this order. Just for demonstration purposes, let's calculate the total of the order using a process implemented as Java plugin rather than by a business rule. So our process will be getting the order as a parameter. It will calculate the total of the order by summing up the totals of the line items that belong to the order, and it will write the result into the order. Okay, so let's start. Just like with functions, the first thing we need to do is create a Java class that will implement a particular interface. For processes, the interface we need to implement is called IProcess. So we go to Eclipse, and we will add our Java class to the same package where our function library is. So we give it a name, and press the Add button to select the interface that the class implements. We type IProcess and click OK. Then we click on Finish, and Eclipse has created the skeleton for our code. Let's go through each method of the interface. The first method is called cancel. It is only supposed to work if the process can take a while and the user is able to cancel the long process. Our process won't be long, so we won't worry about this method and leave the default implementation there. The next method is called execute. This is our main method, which will do all the work. I will come back to it shortly and mention the only other method here called resume. Again, this method is only supposed to work for long processes, so we will leave the default implementation here. So essentially, the only method we need to implement is the execute method. The parameters of the method are described in detail in the programmer's reference guide. The first parameter represents the where-I-am execution environment that the process operates in. The iExecution engine interface has many useful methods that we can use. For example, save object in a database, execute a query, and so on. So let's call this parameter engine. The second parameter represents the array of business objects that will be given to our process as process input. In our case, we only expect one parameter, the specific instance of the purchase order object that we need to recalculate. The type of the parameter that represents business objects is called IEntity. This interface offers many useful methods to manipulate instances of objects, for example, set value of an attribute or get the current value. Again, it is described in detail in the programmer's reference guide. So I will call the second parameter process parameters. Just like with functions, the first thing we need to do is make sure that the process parameters have been correctly given to us. We expect these parameters to be not null, to have the length of 1, and the type of the first parameter must be IEntity. So let's write it down. Here we can see that Eclipse doesn't know about the IEntity interface. When I save the class, I get this error here. To fix it, select Organize Imports in the source menu, or press Ctrl-Shift-O, and Eclipse automatically imports the definition of the IEntity interface from the whereiam.jar file. So when we save it again, the error is gone. Okay, so we throw an exception if the parameters are wrong. If they are correct, we will cast the first parameter to the IEntity object. This first instance represents our order. Now we need to calculate the total of the order by summing up the totals of the line items that belong to the order. That's where the iExecution engine interface can come handy. If we open the context assistant for the iExecution engine interface, we can see that there is the method there called executeAggregateQuery. The first parameter of the method is the process, which is our process. So we use this. And the second parameter is the string representing an aggregate query in the whereiam rule language format. Our aggregate query should look like this. Or we can also write it like this, where the second purchase order ID is the ID of our order. So we can write our aggregate query like this. To get the ID of our order, we use the getID method of the IEntity interface. If we look at the context assistant again, we press Ctrl space to show the context assistant in Eclipse. Here is execute aggregate query operation, and we can see that it returns an object. This object represents the result of the calculation, which can be an integer, long or double, depending on the format of the number, in our case line item total. But if the format of the total in the order is the same as the format of the total in the line item, and it is, we don't even need to know about the type of the returned object, because we will just set it into the order as is. So here we just need to capture the return. Now we need to set this value into the order. The IEntity interface supports the method setAttributeValue. The first parameter is the name of the attribute, and the second parameter is the value to set. So we're setting the total attribute of the order object to order total that we captured in the line before. Note that the code does not compile again when we save the file. This is because the setAttributeValue method may throw a different type of exception compared to exceptions that the execute method supports. To fix this, we will enclose our code in the Java try and catch block, like this. For any exception that may happen inside our code, we will throw an execution exception that the execute method supports. So now everything compiles again. Okay, back to our code. Note that the setAttributeValue method only sets the value in memory, not in the database. To make sure that we update the order in the database, we use the IEntity method of the iExecutionEngine interface like this. The first parameter is the process again. The second parameter is the instance of the order that the database will be updated with. And the other three parameters should be null. And that's it. Our process is now ready. The compiled class of the process is in the bin folder as before. Here it is. Now we can either create a new jar file with this class file or modify our existing jar file to add the class file of the process. I will modify the existing jar file. So we go to the command prompt again and modify the previous command to use the -UVF option instead of -CVF option to modify the jar rather than create it. We run the command, we get our jar in the bin folder, and we copy this jar file into the where I am custom jars directory as before. Unlike functions, with processes there is no need to add anything to the bus server.props file. So now we just need to restart a where I am and add our custom process to the application. So I have restarted a where I am here. Let's go back to the configuration tool and create the process that represents the plugin. We'll give it a name. We shouldn't forget to specify the purchase order object as a parameter to our process, otherwise the plugin will not work. Rather than defining rules for our process, we will select the Custom Software Component Radio button here and specify the fully qualified name of our Java plugin representing the process. Now we can use this process. I will remove the recalculation rule from the purchase order object because we will replace it with a process. And I will add the operation to the form of the purchase order that will start our process. Let's see how this works in the browser. So I log into the application using the browser, and let's create a new order. With a couple of line items. Let's now find this order and navigate to its form. And here we have the calculate button, so let's press it and see if our plugin works. Oops, we have an error which says that we have an invalid expression some line item total, and so on. And the reason is, when I look closely at it, is that I forgot the brackets after where. Okay, so now let's fix it and try again. So we go back to Eclipse, and that's where we need to add our brackets, here and at the end of the expression. Okay, I compile the code, then I go to the command prompt and recreate the jar file. Then I go to the jar file and copy it to the custom jars directory again. And now I restart where I am. Okay, let's try it again. So we refresh the browser, find our order, and run the process again. And now it worked. We can see that the total has been recalculated to 180. So this concludes the tutorial about Java plugins. Obviously, the tutorial only shows a very small part of what is possible with Java plugins. You need to look at the programmer's reference guide and study the available interfaces for more details.